A countdown is now underway that could determine whether this war escalates into a full infrastructure conflict that puts millions of civilians in darkness across Iran. On Saturday night at 7:44 p.m. Eastern Time, President Donald Trump posted an ultimatum to the government in Tehran. The message was direct. Iran has exactly 48 hours to fully reopen the Strait of Hormuz to commercial shipping, or the United States will hit and obliterate Iranian power plants, starting with the biggest one first. That deadline expires Monday night at 7:44 p.m. Eastern, which is 3:14 a.m. Tuesday morning in Tehran. What Trump is threatening is not a military target, it is civilian infrastructure. Iran operates approximately 110 gas-fired power plants across the country, plus solar, hydro, wind, oil, diesel, coal, geothermal, and nuclear facilities that provide electricity to a population of 89 million people. The largest facility by output is the Damavand Combined Cycle Power Plant, located 70 kilometers southeast of downtown Tehran, with generating capacity of 2,868 megawatts. The second largest is Shahid Salimi in Mazandaran province near the Caspian Sea, with output of 2,215 megawatts. Trump did not specify which plant he was referring to as the biggest. He did not need to. The threat itself is the message. If those facilities are destroyed, the lights go out, hospitals lose power, water treatment plants stop operating, refrigeration systems fail, communications networks collapse, traffic signals go dark. The economic and humanitarian consequences cascade outward from the initial strike in ways that affect every person in the impact zone, combatant and non-combatant alike. Iran has responded to this threat with a threat of its own. The Iranian military issued a statement Saturday carried by Fars news agency, warning that if Iran's fuel and energy infrastructure is violated by the enemy, all energy, information technology, and desalination infrastructure belonging to the U.S. and the regime in the region will be targeted. Not some, all. This is no longer a conflict confined to military installations and command centers. This is mutual infrastructure, targeting on a scale that has not been seen in modern warfare between state actors. And the deadline is 48 hours. The ultimatum arrived less than 24 hours after Trump posted on Friday that the United States was getting very close to meeting our objectives and considering winding down military efforts in the Middle East. Those two statements cannot both be accurate. Either the campaign has achieved sufficient success that the strait will reopen without further escalation, or it has not, and threats to obliterate civilian power infrastructure are necessary. The gap between those positions is where the actual operational reality exists. While Trump's Friday post about winding down was still being analyzed, the Pentagon announced deployment of an additional 2,500 Marines to the region aboard amphibious assault ships, the second such deployment in a single week. Behind the scenes, according to 4 sources with knowledge of White House deliberations who spoke to Axios, the administration is actively considering plans to occupy or blockade Iran's Kharg Island, the oil export hub that processes 90% of Iran's crude shipments and generates $78 billion per year in revenue. One source was quoted stating, "We need about a month to weaken the Iranians more with strikes, take the island, and then get them by the balls and use it for negotiations." Simultaneously, the targeting of nuclear facilities on both sides escalated Saturday in a pattern that has never been documented in modern conflict. Iranian ballistic missiles penetrated Israeli air defenses and struck the southern cities of Dimona and Arad, wounding more than 100 people in what Israeli emergency services declared a mass casualty event. The missiles were not intercepted despite Israeli systems being activated. They carried warheads weighing hundreds of kilograms and hit residential buildings directly. Iran framed the strikes explicitly as retaliation for what Tehran says was a joint U.S.-Israeli attack on its Natanz nuclear enrichment facility earlier that same day, a facility currently storing approximately 400 kilograms of highly enriched uranium. Subscribe to Pivot Analysis right now and turn on notifications. What is being documented here involves 3 simultaneous escalation tracks that are converging in ways the official narrative is not addressing. When the 8-hour deadline expires Monday night, when the next nuclear facility comes under fire, when the decision gets made about whether American Marines land on Kharg Island, the analysis will be here. This channel exists to examine the tactical data and connect the elements that official communications are keeping separate. Before going further, it is necessary to establish clearly what is confirmed, what is contested, and what remains in the category of open questions that honest analysis must acknowledge. What is confirmed? President Trump posted his ultimatum at 23:44 GMT on Saturday, March 21st. The exact wording threatened to hit and obliterate Iranian power plants, starting with the biggest one first, if Iran does not fully open without threat the Strait of Hormuz within 48 hours from this exact point in time. Iranian ballistic missiles struck Dimona and Arad on Saturday evening. Israeli Defense Forces spokesman Efi Defrin confirmed the air defense systems were activated but did not intercept the missiles. Major David Adam reported 88 people wounded in Arad, including 10 inches serious condition, and 39 wounded in Dimona, including a 10-year-old boy in critical condition with multiple shrapnel wounds. Iran's Atomic Energy Organization confirmed on Saturday that the Natanz enrichment complex was targeted by what it described as U.S.-Israeli attacks. The International Atomic Energy Agency confirmed receiving notification of the strike. No radioactive leakage was reported. The United States struck more than 90 military targets on Kharg Island on Friday, according to U.S. Central Command. Trump posted that he chose not to wipe out the oil infrastructure on the island, but threatened to reconsider that decision if Iran interferes with safe passage through the Strait of Hormuz. The Pentagon confirmed deployment of approximately 2,500 additional Marines aboard the USS Tripoli and elements of the 31st Marine Expeditionary Unit heading to the Middle East. This is the second major amphibious deployment announced in 1 week. Axios reported Thursday, citing 4 sources with knowledge of the issue, that the Trump administration is considering plans to occupy or blockade Kharg Island. What is contested? Whether the United States or Israel struck Natanz on Saturday. Iran says both countries attacked the facility. An unnamed Israeli official quoted by the Associated Press denied Israel was responsible. The Israeli military has not released a full statement. Whether U.S. military capabilities have degraded Iranian naval and missile threats in the Strait of Hormuz as extensively as claimed, Admiral Brad Cooper, head of U.S. Central Command, asserted Saturday that Iran's ability to attack vessels in the strait had been degraded after U.S. forces dropped 5,000-pound bunker buster bombs on underground Iranian coastal facilities storing anti-ship cruise missiles. Yet Trump is issuing ultimatums. What remains unknown? Whether Trump will actually execute strikes on Iranian power plants if the Monday deadline passes, which specific facility he is referring to as the biggest. Iran operates approximately 110 gas plants plus solar, hydro, wind, oil, diesel, coal, geothermal, and nuclear facilities. The largest by output include the Damavand Combined Cycle Power Plant, located 70 kilometers southeast of Tehran, with output of 2,868 megawatts, the Shahid Salimi Plant in Mazandaran Province near the Caspian Sea, with output of 2,215 megawatts, and the Bushehr Nuclear Power Plant. Whether occupation or blockade of Kharg Island will actually be ordered. Whether Iran will show the zero restraint it has threatened if its energy infrastructure comes under direct attack. What back-channel communications are occurring between Washington and Tehran? To understand the full weight of what is unfolding, you need to examine 3 parallel escalation tracks that are converging simultaneously. The ultimatum over the Strait of Hormuz, the targeting of nuclear facilities on both sides, and the Kharg Island question. Each one individually represents a significant escalation. Together, they form a pattern that suggests the conflict is not winding down but entering a more dangerous phase. Let us start with the ultimatum itself, because the internal contradictions matter. Trump posted Friday that the United States was getting very close to meeting objectives and considering winding down military efforts. Less than 24 hours later, he posted an ultimatum threatening to obliterate power plants. Those two statements cannot both be accurate descriptions of reality. Either the military campaign has achieved its objectives and degraded Iranian capabilities sufficiently that the strait will reopen, or it has not, and an ultimatum backed by threats to civilian infrastructure is necessary. The gap between those positions is the analytical starting point for everything that follows. The Strait of Hormuz has been effectively closed to most commercial shipping since the war began February 28th. The waterway handles approximately 20% of the world's oil supply and roughly 1/5 of global liquefied natural gas shipments under normal conditions. Iranian Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi told Japan's Kyodo News on Friday that the strait is closed only to ships belonging to our enemies, countries that attack us. He indicated Iran had been approached by a number of countries seeking safe passage and that decisions about which vessels can transit are made by the military. Admiral Cooper stated Saturday that U.S. strikes this week destroyed intelligence support sites and missile radar relays that Iran uses to monitor ship movements in the strait. He claimed Iranian capability to threaten shipping has been degraded. Yet Al Jazeera's Manuel Rapallo, reporting from Washington, noted there appears to be a gap between what the White House wants in the Strait of Hormuz and what the U.S. military says they have already accomplished. If Iranian naval and missile threats in the strait have been degraded as extensively as claimed, why is an ultimatum threatening to obliterate power plants necessary? The economic dimension of this ultimatum deserves direct attention. Oil prices are currently at $112 per barrel for Brent crude, a 48% surge since February 28th when the war began. Gas prices in the United States hit a nationwide average of $3.91 per gallon Friday, the highest since October 2022. That represents an increase of 93 cents per gallon since the war started. American drivers have collectively spent approximately $4.5 billion more on gasoline in the past 3 weeks, according to petroleum analysts. Goldman Sachs has suggested that elevated oil prices could persist through 2027. The International Energy Agency executive director warned Friday that it could take up to 6 months to restore oil and gas flows from the Gulf, even if the conflict ended immediately. If you live anywhere that imports oil, this is already in your energy prices. If you work in aviation, manufacturing, agriculture, or shipping, this conflict is already disrupting your supply chain. If your retirement account carries exposure to energy, consumer, manufacturing, or airline sectors, you have already absorbed repricing. The Trump administration's decision Friday to lift sanctions on 140 million barrels of Iranian oil currently sitting on tankers, enough to satisfy global demand for roughly 1.5 days, reflects the desperation behind the scenes to contain energy price increases before they trigger broader economic damage. Now let us turn to what happened at nuclear facilities on both sides Saturday, because the targeting pattern here represents an escalation category that has not been seen in modern conflict. According to Iran's Atomic Energy Organization, U.S. and Israeli forces struck the Natanz enrichment complex Saturday morning. The facility is located approximately 220 kilometers southeast of Tehran and is one of Iran's most important uranium enrichment sites. According to earlier reports, Natanz currently stores around 400 kilograms of highly enriched uranium. The International Atomic Energy Agency confirmed it was informed of the attack and stated there was no radioactive leakage reported. Hours later, Iranian ballistic missiles struck Dimona and Arad in southern Israel. Dimona is home to the Shimon Peres Negev Nuclear Research Center, the facility at the heart of Israel's undeclared nuclear weapons program, built in secret with French assistance and operational since 1958. Israel has never officially acknowledged possessing nuclear weapons, but is widely assessed to have developed nuclear capability by the late 1960s. The International Atomic Energy Agency stated it received no indication of damage to the Nuclear Research Center and that no abnormal radiation levels were detected in the area. Iranian state television framed the strikes explicitly as response to the attack on Natanz. What makes this pattern analytically significant is that both sides are now demonstrating willingness to target nuclear facilities directly. Israeli air defenses were activated during the Iranian missile attacks but failed to intercept the incoming threats. IDF spokesman Effie Defrin stated the air defense systems were activated but did not intercept the missile and that the incident is being reviewed. These were not special or unfamiliar missiles, according to the military spokesman. These were standard ballistic missiles with warheads weighing hundreds of kilograms. The fact that they penetrated defenses and struck near a nuclear facility represents a failure of the defensive architecture that Israel has spent billions of dollars constructing. For people living in those cities, the numbers are not statistics. At least 88 people were wounded in Arad, including 10 inches serious condition, according to Major David Adam. Videos from the scene showed multiple buildings with major damage, including outer walls ripped off and smoke rising from structures. In Dimona, 39 people were wounded, including a 10-year-old boy in critical condition with multiple shrapnel wounds. This represents the highest number of casualties in a single attack since the war began. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu called it a very difficult evening for Israel and again promised to continue attacking Iran. The third escalation track involves Kharg Island and the question that is being debated inside the White House right now: whether to occupy or blockade the facility. Kharg Island is a small landmass, approximately 15 miles off Iran's coast in the Persian Gulf. It serves as Iran's primary oil export terminal and handles roughly 90% of the country's crude oil shipments. The island has deep water ports that allow large tankers to dock and load crude for export, something much of Iran's coastline cannot accommodate. According to former U.S. Treasury sanctions official Miad Maleki, Kharg generates $78 billion per year in energy revenue with irreplaceable deep water berths no other Iranian port can replicate. The United States struck more than 90 military targets on Kharg on Friday, including air defenses, a naval base, mine storage facilities, and deployment sites, according to U.S. Central Command. Trump posted that he chose not to wipe out the oil infrastructure, but threatened to reconsider if Iran continues interfering with shipping. Axios reported Thursday, citing 4 sources with knowledge of White House thinking, that occupation or blockade of the island is under serious consideration. One source was quoted stating, "We need about a month to weaken the Iranians more with strikes, take the island, and then get them by the balls and use it for negotiations." Senator Lindsey Graham, who has been influential in shaping Trump's Iran policy, posted on X Saturday that seldom in warfare does an enemy provide you a single target like Kharg Island that could dramatically alter the outcome of the conflict. The Pentagon has announced deployment of approximately 4,500 Marines total in the past week aboard the USS Tripoli, with elements of the 31st Marine Expeditionary Unit and the USS Boxer with elements of the 11th Marine Expeditionary Unit. These are amphibious forces equipped for potential landing operations. Subscribe to Pivot Analysis and turn on notifications. The decisions being made in Washington and Tehran over the next 48 hours will determine whether this conflict escalates to infrastructure targeting that affects millions of civilians, whether nuclear facilities become routine targets, whether American ground forces land on Iranian territory. When those decisions get made, the analysis will be here, connecting the documented evidence rather than transmitting official talking points. To be fair, there is a counterargument to the escalation narrative, and it deserves serious consideration. Analysts who support the administration's strategy argue that the ultimatum and threat of infrastructure strikes are pressure tactics designed to achieve objectives without actually executing the threats. They point to Trump's own statement that he previously chose not to strike power plants in Tehran because it would cause years of damage and trauma to the civilian population. They argue the threats are leverage, not actual intent. Some defense analysts contend that U.S. strikes have indeed degraded Iranian naval and missile capabilities more extensively than Iran is willing to acknowledge publicly, and that the ultimatum is designed to give Iran a face-saving way to reopen the strait while claiming it was their decision. They note that Iranian Foreign Minister Araghchi has been in discussions with multiple countries about safe passage, suggesting Tehran may be looking for diplomatic off-ramps. Regarding Kharg Island, retired Rear Admiral Mark Montgomery told Axios that an occupation mission could expose U.S. troops to unnecessary risk given the uncertain upside. He argued that if we seize Kharg Island, Iran is going to turn off the spigot on the other end, meaning the United States would not actually control Iranian oil production even if it held the export terminal, Montgomery suggested it was more likely that after approximately 2 more weeks of attacks to further degrade Iranian capabilities, the U.S. would send destroyers and aircraft into the strait to escort tankers, eliminating the need for an invasion. Those are serious arguments grounded in strategic logic. Here is where the counterargument runs into the evidence. If U.S. capabilities have degraded Iranian threats as extensively as claimed, the ultimatum threatening power plant obliteration should not be necessary. The fact that it was issued suggests the threat in the strait remains substantial enough that Trump believes infrastructure targeting is required to force Iran's hand. The deployment of 4,500 additional Marines on amphibious assault ships in the past week does not align with a strategy of winding down military efforts. That is preparation for potential ground operations. On the nuclear facilities question, the pattern of mutual targeting cannot be dismissed as routine military operations. Iran striking near Dimona in declared retaliation for strikes on Natanz establishes a tit-for-tat framework where nuclear sites are now considered legitimate targets by both sides. The International Atomic Energy Agency issued a statement Saturday calling for maximum military restraint to avoid any risk of a nuclear accident during the war on Iran. That language, maximum military restraint to avoid nuclear accident, is not the language used for routine conflict. That is the language used when the agency assesses genuine risk. Here is what to watch in the days immediately ahead. The 8-hour deadline expires at 7:44 p.m. Eastern Time, Monday, March 23rd. Whether Trump follows through on the threat to strike power plants will answer critical questions about his actual red lines and willingness to target civilian infrastructure. Iran has threatened that if its fuel and energy infrastructure is violated by the enemy, all energy, information, technology, and desalination infrastructure belonging to the U.S. and the regime in the region will be targeted. If strikes occur, Iran's response will determine whether the conflict escalates to mutual infrastructure destruction. Watch for any additional Iranian strikes on Israeli territory, particularly near nuclear or critical infrastructure facilities. Watch for Israeli responses and whether they continue targeting Iranian nuclear sites. Watch for any indications that amphibious forces are moving into position for potential Kharg Island operations. Watch for oil market reactions as the deadline approaches. Watch for any signals from NATO allies about whether they will assist in Hormuz security operations. Here is the full picture of where things stand on day 22 of the war. Confirmed, Trump issued a 8-hour ultimatum at 23:44 GMT Saturday, threatening to obliterate Iranian power plants if the Strait of Hormuz is not fully reopened. The deadline expires 7:44 p.m. ET Monday. Iranian missiles struck Dimona and Arad Saturday, wounding more than 100 people after penetrating Israeli air defenses. Iran says U.S. and Israel struck Natanz enrichment facility Saturday. The U.S. struck more than 90 targets on Kharg Island Friday. The Pentagon is deploying 4,500 Marines on amphibious assault ships. Oil is at $112 per barrel. Gas at $3.91 per gallon. Not yet confirmed whether Trump will actually execute power plant strikes if the deadline passes, whether U.S. or Israel struck Natanz Saturday as Iran claims, whether Kharg Island occupation or blockade will be ordered, whether Iran will follow through on threats to target all U.S. energy infrastructure in the region if attacked, what back-channel negotiations may be occurring. Professional consensus. Multiple sources tell Axios that Kharg occupation is under serious consideration. Goldman Sachs assesses oil prices could remain elevated through 2027. The International Energy Agency warns 6 months minimum to restore Gulf energy flows even if conflict ended immediately. Former military officials assess that Kharg occupation would expose U.S. forces to significant risk with uncertain strategic benefit. Subscribe to Pivot Analysis and turn on notifications. Evidence first, analysis second. Never propaganda for any side. Leave one question in the comments. Do you believe Trump will actually strike Iranian power plants if the Monday deadline passes, or is this pure negotiating leverage? Every response gets read.